Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to my new channel. If you want something in particular, comment below, and I will oblige. Thanks again. Ferrari F12 Berlinetta 2012 Buying Guide. Key points: 6.3-litre V12, rear-wheel drive, breathtaking power. Some say it's got too much power. TDF version is even more powerful. On its Geneva launch in 2012, the F12 Berlinetta became the fastest and most powerful thing in the Ferrari catalogue. Using a version of the F140 engine used in the Enzo and the FF, and that would 1 year later form the basis of the LaFerrari drivetrain, the F12 replaced the 599 GTB as the carrier of Ferrari's big front-engined intercontinental bruiser flag. The F12 was both more powerful and more efficient than the 599, but not as a result of the usual ploy of fitting a turbocharger to a smallish motor. All the F12's power came from an unholy mixture of pistons, valves and petrol-gobbling displacement. Its advantage over the 599 wasn't just mechanical either. Its aluminium spaceframe chassis was 70 kilograms lighter and 20% stiffer than its predecessors, and clever bodywork gave it a SUB 0.3 drag coefficient and 76% more downforce than the 599 at 124 miles per hour. Ferrari reported that the F12 was nearly 4 seconds quicker around its Fiorano test track than the 599 GTB, at 1 minute 23 seconds. Possibly even more impressive was the news that it was 2 seconds quicker than the Enzo and the 458 Italia. Skip to the powertrain section if you'd like to see exactly what that translates into when there's a taciturn fin behind the wheel. The price of a new F12 in 2012 was £240,000 before options. In 2015, the F12 stakes were raised by the release of what was effectively the GTO model. The Tour de France, or F12 TDF as Ferrari officially termed it, was named after successful Ferrari endurance races from the 50s and 60s. The changes over the standard F12 were many and dove deep into the fabric of the car. Power was increased from 730 to 769 horsepower, torque from 509 to 520 pound-feet, the red line went up to 8,900 revolutions per minute, and the overall gearing was lowered by 6%. Shifting times were significantly decreased, and so was the overall weight, by more than 110 kilograms. All of that added up to a 0.2 seconds reduction in the 0 to 62 miles per hour time from 3.1 to 2.9 seconds, and a cut of 0.6 seconds in the 0 to 124 miles per hour time to 7.9 seconds. The track was widened, front and rear wheel steering was added along with bigger, stickier tires. A scooped and finned-up rebody with a different rear screen rake and active rear diffuser flaps created 87% more downforce, but it was by common consent a fierce and edgy car. For many of those who had a LaFerrari in the garage, the TDF, which was only a couple of seconds slower than the LAF around Fiorano, was adopted as the natural backup. 799 examples were made between 2015 and 2017 at a new price of £339,000. Today they are worth considerably more than that. We'll get into the details in the verdict section. In 2017, Ferrari offered 70 special F12s as part of a 70th anniversary range-wide run. Covering all 5 Ferraris that were in production at the time, the 70th program singled out 70 examples of each model for individual cosmetic enhancements. 12 of these 70th anniversary F12s were supplied to UK owners, just one of them being a right-hand driver. That car, the so-called 612 Scaglietti, Homage, number 62 in the run of 70, is for sale in the PH classifieds at the moment. We'll give you a link to that in the verdict at the end of this piece. Although no official production figures were released, it's been calculated that around 4,600 F12s were built between 2012 and 2017, at which point it was replaced by the 812 Superfast. In 2012, the £240,000 F12 seemed outrageously expensive to common folk, but buyers in this market weren't overly concerned. What they did notice was the fact that the F12 was cheaper and more powerful than the Lamborghini Aventador. Now you can get an early F12 with under 15,000 miles on it for £150,000. If you read that sentence in isolation and with no knowledge of the car, you might screech in indignation, but if you get to drive one and you've got the wherewithal to do it, buying an F12 looks like a no-brainer. Engine. One was for best performance and the other was for best engine over 4 litres. If there had been a category for best noise, it probably would have won that too. Unlike the FF, the F12 didn't have a complicated all-wheel drive system that could heavily dent your bank balance if it went wrong. It did, however, have an excellent electronic diff. Unlike the 599, it had a double-clutch gearbox which was very fast and very smooth, and which had an amazing launch control function. Astonishingly, the F12 would pull top gear from below 30 miles per hour. The Manettino toggle gave you Sport, Race, CT off, a traction control mode retaining a bit of assistance, and ESC off, which was your tire shredding mode. With enough power to destroy the 0 to 124 miles per hour sprint in 8.5 seconds, it was worth striking up a good relationship with your tire supplier. Michelin Pilot Supersports were the default choice. P0s were eminently usable alternatives. You could get between 350 and 380 miles out of a 92-litre, 20-gallon, tankful on a long main roads type trip, which was perfectly acceptable for a big-inch V12 Grand Tourer with such huge performance potential. Using more of that potential on a point and squirt type trip would bring the figure down to 9 mpg, and refills would be needed every 120 miles. A full refill from bone dry would be approaching £140 in the UK, but it would not be good practice to run the tank down below the last 2 blobs on the fuel gauge, as the pumps pull hard on F12s and the fueling software can get upset if there's not a steady supply of juice. The F12 came with a 4-year warranty and a 7-year servicing plan, by which later cars will still be covered. Extending the warranty costs around £4,000 a year in the UK. Not every owner will want to lay out that sort of money, preferring instead to gamble on the car's generally excellent reliability record. Outside the servicing plan, expect to pay under £1,000 for a minor service. Chassis. We began the powertrain section with some awards info, so let's do likewise here in what is effectively the driving and handling section. Not in the way you might expect by listing all the supercar of the year wins it scored, but by telling you about one it didn't win, Autocar's Best Driver's Car of 2013. It only came second in that, but being pipped by a Porsche 911 GT3 is about as honourable a defeat as you could imagine, and remarkable for a big front-engined galoot like the F12. The engine is monstrous in every sense, but by mounting it practically under the windscreen, Ferrari managed to get 54% of the F12's weight over the back wheels. An unfashionably high-sounding number maybe, but whatever your view was on that, the F12 could convince all but the most skeptical that a car didn't have to have its engine in the middle to qualify it as a supercar. It wasn't a small vehicle, but nor did it feel especially big. It was actually narrower and shorter in both overall length and wheelbase than the 599. If your last Ferrari was the tail-happy 550 of the late 1990s, early 2000s, your first few F12 drives were best done with a healthy respect for the throttle. Your pedal-based pathway to around 50% more power. The rigid box section aluminium alloy chassis allied to magnetorheological dampers and Ferrari's formidable suite of electronic controls kept things more or less under control at speeds ranging from mundane to mental, but you certainly wouldn't describe an F12 as a starter Ferrari. As noted, you did have one of the best electronic control packages in the business to help bail you out of a sticky situation, along with the precision and immediacy of the last of the great Ferrari hydraulic steering systems. The subsequent 812 was the first Ferrari equipped with electric power steering. But narrow lanes still had to be approached with more than half an eye on the hedgerows if you were giving it a bootful. Despite the brilliance of the traction and stability control systems which kept you out of the fields more often than not, your brain would keep nagging you about the squirrely feel under power, even in a straight-ish line. You simply had to put your trust in the car, feel the fear and do it anyway. The ride was compliant enough for satisfying touring and controlled enough for alpine thrashery. And like every Ferrari thus equipped, the bumpy road mode button worked brilliantly, in the UK at least, although the unfeasible grunt of the engine from 3,500 revolutions per minute was always ready to widen your eyes and other less seemly body parts. The F12's highly distinctive aerobridge air channel ran from the bonnet and along the sides of the car to boost downforce. Carbon ceramic brake discs were standard and were unusually, and perhaps overly, sensitive for road use. Active brake cooling ducts ahead of the front wheels stayed shut in normal driving to reduce drag. Extra brownie points were earned if you arrived in the car park with them open. Forged wheels painted in matte silver were a £3,500 option. There was a chassis lift option, but don't exclude cars without it from your F12 search, as owner opinions are split as to how essential it is on the car. Bodywork, the 2012 on F12 Berlinetta was the last Ferrari to be designed by Pininfarina. From the 2013 on Ferrari, everything came from Ferrari's own in-house design studio Centro-style Ferrari. The switch didn't bring about a great sea change in the big Ferrari GT look, because the overall Pininfarina influence wasn't thrown away and is still very apparent in the 812 Superfast. That's a good thing because the F12 does make an exceptionally good fist of marrying elegance with brutishness. For many, it had more instant curb appeal than the 599. F12 fuel caps have been known to pop open on the move. Some owners thought they must have been accidentally kneeing the release button on the door card, but it should be technically impossible for the flap to open while the car is in motion. Rosso Berlinetta was a triple-layer shade of red designed specifically for the F12. For a historic paint shade like Campionario blue you'd be paying another £7,000 plus. Scuderia shields were a £1,000 extra. Cargo space at 320 litres or getting on for 500 with the rear divider removed was more than decent for this type of vehicle. It will take 2 sets of golf clubs. There was a bespoke luggage pack for the F12, a £12,000 option. Some cars suffered from corrosion under the paint around the rear wing vents. Ferrari paid for the cost of restitution, which involved a partial repaint. Interior, Grand Touring cars need to be comfortable and the F12 very much ticked that box. The high, long bonnet concealing so much metal makes the seating position feel lower than it actually is. In tight environments there's no getting away from the fact that it's bigger than a Ford Focus, but as with anything you will get used to it. Taller drivers might find themselves wishing for a little more fore and aft steering wheel adjustment to bring it a little closer. The horse-hoof clipping gearshift paddles didn't move with the wheel, which felt alien to some. The design of the interior is very traditional in many ways, with a fairly random splattering of whatever buttons couldn't be persuaded to fit onto the wheel. But that could just as easily be seen as a positive and not a negative depending on how you view cars like this. Ferrari would say that button scatter is a great way to keep your mind and hands active, and that's certainly no bad thing in a car as dynamic and urgent as the F12. The passenger dash display was a nice extra to have, as was the carbon driver zone. Privacy glass in the rear quarter panels at over £2,600, maybe not so much because it further restriced your already limited over-shoulder vision. F12s rarely left you stranded, but electrical quirks could add an element of uncertainty to the ownership experience. Sometimes the climate control wouldn't restart when the car was turned off. Sometimes there would be startery noises but no engine fire-up. Sometimes the window wouldn't fully seat itself in the frame, causing an annoying windrush at cruising speeds. Sometimes dash warning lights would suggest that the electronic parking brake or the ABS had conked out. Turning the car off and on again and or waiting for a bit would generally trick the car back into action from most of these hiatus type situations. Closing and or locking and unlocking the doors would usually reboot the immobilizer. Anecdotal input suggests that the turn it off and on Argon thing was more of a requirement when the car had been used and was warm than when starting the car from cold after a long layoff, which was generally problem-free. Carbon race seats were a nice option. In the course of our research we saw a car with carbon seats featuring manually reclinable backs, but we don't know if that was the norm. You could also get rather lovely Daytona-style seats which seem to suit the car very well. Probs best to avoid cream Alcantara seat inserts if you wear work pants or jeans a lot, as they will soon look grubby. The seats, not your pants. The premium JBL audio setup is great, but the door speakers have been known to blow. Black leather with red stitching is a classic Ferrari look, but Bordeaux leather looks very good in our Grigio F12. And who doesn't like titanium air vents?